Welcome to this video from the Healing for Men site. This week we're going to be talking about introversion and what that's all about. Is it a gift? Is it a curse? Is it a curse? Or is it somewhere in between? So if you're watching this on YouTube during the week, hello to you as well. Thank you for watching. Appreciate all those who've watched my last videos in the last few weeks. Thank you. Weekend, how are you all doing? How has your week been? How are you feeling? And that's really where I thought I would start with for this week. I've had a 3-day conference with work, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and I realised yesterday that I was tired and that I was just quite drained, and I spent most of the afternoon on the couch, and it made me realise that how aware I was of being an introvert. And so I thought, well, let's talk about it. Let's talk about being an introvert and what, not just what that's like, but what it means to be an introvert. So I'm going to take you back a little while. A couple of weeks ago I talked about things that we should care about as men, and I think one of those things that we should care about is ourselves and understanding ourselves. So often we can think and focus our minds on the external things, and often those things on the external are very dramatic, and they are, sports, or it's hobbies, news, work, relationships, anything at all. It's often external. But maybe one of the things for us to care about more is ourselves. And I know for the best part of the first 40 years of my life, I didn't. In fact, I shied away from most of that because I didn't really know what I wanted to find. I thought that I was weird. I thought that I was unworthy. I didn't have value. And so I didn't spend any time focusing on myself at all, not in terms of understanding who I was. I thought I was broken, ashamed, and that I didn't really want to know what was lurking in the inner cesspit of what I felt my life was and who I was. So I didn't really focus on myself at all. And then as things started to unravel, actually probably a couple of years before, a friend of mine who I was a youth worker, and they acknowledged to me that they were very introverted, and it kind of confused me, and I think it was the first time I'd heard the word and somebody kind of own it, but I still didn't really know what it was, and I still didn't really think that it was for me, or that it was what I was, and so I left it at that. So a couple of years later, a friend of mine said that that I was an introvert, and I had no idea what it actually meant. Maybe I thought it meant that that I didn't like being around people, that I was quiet, and I know I am quiet, and so they actually recommended a book for me. And it was a book called Quiet by Susan Cain. And I think I usually go on record saying that my realisation of being an introvert was that I liked sitting on my own in a room, and it was quiet, and it was one of my first real self-awareness moments of how much I enjoyed reading a book on introversion whilst being quiet in a room all by myself, and it was almost like it was a kind of a new tool, a new awakening for myself at that point. So definitely one key thing to understand about myself. And so caring for myself, one of the first things that I began to realise about myself was about being an introvert. And the question today, is it a gift or is it a curse? And so, because I sometimes I've read recently, or I've heard somebody say that they weren't. It wasn't like being an introvert wasn't something that there was an illness, and I kind of questioned that. Is there a default to think that introversion is weird? And if there is a default, what's that all about? Is it because generally in the world we have a kind of default that's more extroverted? It's about production, it's about performance, it's about noise, it's about drama. I mean, slow TV doesn't really exist on real TV, but you can find it on YouTube, whether that's people walking in the countryside, or the light of a candle, or railway journeys, those kind of things. So those kind of slow, peaceful activities. And we find slow and peaceful outside if we look for it, by walking in nature and along the beach. But also we can find fast outside, whether that's a fast-paced city or a town. So there's a mixture, but if it's a gift or it's a curse. And I think one of the things I so realised was that it wasn't about avoiding people or not liking people, because I've always liked people. It's classically, it's more about where I find my energy, and I could feel my energy when I read the book, and I could feel my energy restore when I began to realise who I was and began to realise that this was part of who I am. And if nothing else, it was an aid for me to understand myself and understand my strengths at that time, and understand how I tick and understand what I need. And so it's more than just energy, but it was more about understanding myself. But it also helped me understand why I felt uncomfortable in other situations. I'd always avoided the parties. I'd always avoided, I felt uncomfortable in loud situations. And a lot of that was feeling unsafe. And so just thinking about this introvert-extrovert thing, some of the times when we are, as introverts, in a place where there's lots of people, and we can feel uncomfortable in that space because we feel safe, we feel unsafe, and so finding one person that we feel safe with to talk to is often the way we restore ourselves in that place, or we avoid it completely. And I'm just kind of thinking out loud here how much our introvert-extrovert nature is linked to safety, is linked to our emotional well-being. And so whilst we might feel like we like being on our own, and that's where we find our energy, it could also be that we've been unsafe in those extrovert kind of spaces. We've kind of felt like we are maybe imposter syndrome, imposters in that world, or we've had to put a mask on to pretend, and so we've not really been our real self in that place. So just thinking out loud, introversion, gift or a curse, and it's definitely a gift, but it's a gift that we can grasp hold of once we become aware of it for ourselves. So that's what I was thinking in terms of introversion. What about you? Let me pause to ask you the question. Have you done a Myers-Briggs course, or read a book on identifying who you are in regard to being an introvert or an extrovert? And of course, there are times contextually where you might be more introverted than extroverted, but it's about where you find that strength and that energy for yourselves. People might drain you, people might give you energy, people might give you creativity, and there are other times where they might drain you. In her book, Quiet, Susan Cain talks about a number of things that might help us identify whether we're an introvert or extrovert. Some of the things include preferring one-to-one conversations over group activities, about caring slightly less about things like wealth and fame and status, about small gatherings, people describing themselves as small, soft-spoken or mellow, disliking conflict, doing the best work on their own, letting calls go to voicemail, if you had to choose, preferring a weekend with absolutely nothing to do with one other than one where there's too many things scheduled. Being able to concentrate easily, that could be another one, and not enjoying multitasking. And there can be a variety of reasons why those things might be the case. I'm just going to... Christelle's put a comment there. Thank you, Christelle. Masking when feeling unsafe is so true relating to this. Yeah, and Christelle and I were talking about this earlier on. And it just kind of dawned on me, this sense of how safety, emotional safety is akin to this kind of the activities of introversion and extroversion. So thank you for that, Christelle. Thank you. So your thoughts, being an introvert or an extrovert? And as I said, this was one of my first kind of realizations in my kind of path of self-discovery quite a few years ago. And it doesn't, I sometimes forget about it, but this week, having been around people, I felt both the energy from people and the creativity from people. I didn't feel necessarily as drained, but the day after getting back, I could certainly feel tired, and I quite enjoyed the space that I have here where it's quiet and I'm on my own and I can just sit and read and just rest. And maybe that's normal for extroverts too. Maybe it's not just me, but just thought that would use that reality this week to have a conversation about introversion or extroversion. I think it's difficult on things like social media and YouTube. The temptation for me here, if I'm talking about something, YouTube and making a video, there's a temptation to be animated, there's a temptation to be loud, to grab people's attention. And I know for 12 and a half minutes, you're not going to sit and listen to me talk like this. So I have to do something to grab your attention. But I don't know what that is, because that's not me. I am who I am, and I'm softly spoken, I'm a good listener, I am lots of things that make me an introvert, but that doesn't mean to say I don't have something to say, and say quietly and slowly and in this kind of format. So I wanted also to share something a little bit about the difference between an externalizer and an internalizer, and whether this resonates with anyone here. I'm just going to take a drink. Because linked to introvert and extrovert about our energy is how we might process deep things in terms of our feelings. And I wanted to share this with you because it might be newer for you. In her book, Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, Lindsay Gibson, and I love this book by the way, talks about how we process the difficult things in our past, and especially abuse and emotionally immature parents that we've had as children growing up. And she says that broadly we react in two ways, either externalizing or internalizing the situation. And of course it's a spectrum, and there are unhealthy things at both the extremes of these, but these are the things that she recognises are about how an internaliser would process. An internaliser is likely to be highly sensitive and perceptive, and if you want more about highly sensitivity, there's a book that's really good on that. An internaliser is likely to have strong emotions. An internaliser has a deep need for connection. An internaliser has a strong intuition about genuine connection, so they can tell when somebody is being false. But also, I just want you to know that if that's you, then it's absolutely normal to want to be loved, and it's not weird to want to be loved. People might tell you that that's weird, but it's not. That's because you have a genuine desire for connection and to belong. So you're not weird for wanting to be loved. An internalizer is likely to apologise about needing help, to be apologetic, to be resistant or reticent about needing help. An internalizer is likely to become invisible and is easy to neglect because the externalizer makes a lot more noise. Shouts, screams, makes noise, but an internalizer is likely to attract less attention, to be invisible, to maybe think, if I'm invisible, somebody might like me or notice me. An internalizer is likely to be fiercely independent because they've had no choice. It's not a necessity. It's a necessity. It's not a choice they've had to look out for themselves when they realised that their needs haven't been met, and no one did come to them when they were quiet. An internalizer may be unlikely to see abuse for what it is because they're just internalising it and they're thinking of it as their own fault and responsibility. An internalizer is likely to do most of the emotional work in a relationship. They might soothe other people. They might have strong empathy to help or rescue somebody. They might be the responsible one to care for other people, children, siblings, brothers, sisters, etc. And they believe often that self-neglect will buy them love, will give them love. So that's what an internalizer. And just to summarise, they don't necessarily want to bother other people. They might fantasise that they can change the given situation and make others like them. And so that's kind of something about an internalizer when it comes to emotions. And I wonder whether that's something for you to reflect on as you think about yourself, as I think about myself. And I recognise myself as an internalizer as equally as I recognise myself as an introvert. In thinking about caring for ourselves and what we should care about and being ourselves, man, what does that mean for you? What does this talk, this chat this evening, what are you inspired by? What do you think of yourself as an extrovert or an introvert? Somewhere in between? Do you feel like you're uncomfortable having to be an extrovert type character and you're kind of masking something and it doesn't feel quite real, almost like imposter syndrome? Maybe there's a clue there that uncomfortability, that discomfort is something that is wrestling and niggling you and that it's not to be ignored anymore and to recognise and accept. It's about acceptance and having the courage and the strength to recognise who you are and yourself. Try and keep in denying of ourselves to pretend makes us tired, makes us uncomfortable, makes us ill, and so caring for ourselves is so important. So this evening's live chat, a little bit longer than 10 minutes, on introversion, gift or a curse, and ultimately it's about accepting ourselves and our qualities and understanding ourselves, and that's a strength in itself. I'm going to close this evening with a blessing from John O'Donoghue, and it's called For Solitude. And let's just have a moment of quiet just before then. May you recognise in your life the presence, power and light of your soul. May you recognise that you are never alone, that your soul, in its brightness and belonging, connects you intimately with the rhythm of the universe. May you have respect for your individuality and difference. May you realise that the shape of your soul is unique, that you have a special destiny here, that behind the facade of your life there is something beautiful and eternal happening. May you learn to see yourself with the same delight, pride and expectation with which God sees you in every moment. And that was For Solitude by John O'Donoghue. Thank you for watching. Thank you for, if you end up liking or sharing this video, thank you. And I'll see you next week. Have a good, safe and kind weekend, whatever you're doing, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now.